So please let me introduce Eleni. Dr. Eleni Kroupi is working as a neuroscience research engineer and project manager at Starlab company. You can find more information about Starlab on the webpage starlab.es. She received her Ph.D. in electrical engineering from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne. Before joining Starlab, she has worked as a postdoctoral researcher in the Applied Signal Processing Group at EPFL and in the Department of Psychology at University of Freiburg, Switzerland. And her research interests include affective computing, biomedical signal processing, machine learning in biomedical and affective signals, analysis of brain and peripheral electrical activity, nonlinear signal modeling and analysis. So welcome, Eleni, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rafael, for this introduction. Good afternoon to everybody from my side as well. So as Rafael said, the talk of today is going to be on advanced EEG processing tools and applications. I have tried to do my best to create, to present you something like a compromise between low-level and high-level features of this kind of processing tools and applications, so that at least you get a glimpse of what you can do with the EEG signals. Okay, so let's start. I really hope you enjoy the talk. So as you probably know, a typical EEG pipeline includes acquiring EEG signal with the device that you already have, and then applying some offline or real-time processing tools with the final goal to present some outputs, like to do, for example, let's say some group comparisons, or to present some like visual characteristics about the analysis you have been doing. We usually provide services of signal analysis, which most of the times we deliver in the forms of a report that you can see here. So as you probably already know, you have some steps required to do a proper EEG analysis. These include the pre-processing, which mainly includes the removal of the noise, so that you bring your EEG signals in the best possible condition, so that later on you extract particular features from them. And then finally, later on, you may want to do some statistics or apply some classification methods in order to be able to discriminate between two groups or between two conditions, etc. So these are the topics I will try to cover in the talk of today. I have included this picture that you can see in the right corner of the presentation, because this is how I see the whole topic. Like you can see there that there are two people who are looking at the same thing, but from a different perspective. So one sees this letter as a Q and the other one sees this letter as a B. So for me, all these methodologies that we're going to talk about today, like that include band power, cross-frequency coupling, complexity, and connectivity, they are actually different points of view of the same thing, which is the EEG signal. I would say that each one of them gives like different information. So literally the way I see the whole thing is getting a whole, like a bigger perspective of what is happening in the brain when you include different varieties of these different techniques. So in this talk, we are going to focus on the feature extraction part of the EEG signals, once that you have already pre-processed them. The first thing I'm going to talk about, but I will not spend much time here, is I just want to remind you, because I assume that everybody knows more or less what is band power in the EEG signal. I just want to remind you that each band power has been shown to be related with some particular functions. This list is not exclusive, of course. So, for example, the delta EEG band has been related to slow wave sleep. The theta band has been related to meditation and concentration. The alpha band is related to relaxation. The beta band to active, busy, or anxious thinking, and to active concentration as well. And then the gamma band has been related to binding information from different sensory modalities. We should not forget the band power analysis before going to more complex analysis. I wanted to present you two applications that for me they have used like band power features in a very nice way. One of them, we carried it out within the project, the Michael J. Fox Foundation project on Parkinson's disease. And what we show actually here, what we found is an increase in the power of the low oscillator. And also we found a decrease of the frequency of the alpha band. So with disease progression. Okay, let me explain a bit better. We have here, you can see that we have the healthy control symbolized by HC. And then we have the rapid eye movement behavior disorder, which is a disorder that has to do with inability of inhibiting the sensory outputs during sleep. That means that these patients, they're actually acting out their dreams, which can be dangerous to themselves, and they can be dangerous to the people who they are sleeping with. This RBD can then later on evolve into a PD, the Parkinson's disease, which can then later on evolve into dementia with Lewy bodies, which can lead into mental decline. The dementia with Lewy bodies is the second most commonly known disease, mental disease, dementia disease after the Alzheimer's. So this is the disorder progression, and you can see from the figure here that we notice power increase, and then we notice the slowing of the alpha band that is moving towards the lower frequencies. And we also notice power decrease in this population. Another application that I also wanted to mention regarding these power bands is for the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Probably you have heard of this disorder before, but it has to do with children that they are hyperactive, so they cannot really focus. And this doesn't allow them to carry out normal tasks. So based on the power ratio of the theta to beta bands, it was found, significant differences were found between ADHD children compared to age-matched healthy controls in a variety of studies. So that finally this metric was approved by the FDA as a metric that can help confirm an ADHD diagnosis. Also, you probably know that there are a lot of neurofeedback studies that base their neurofeedback activities on the power band. Again, this metric has been is very important because the neurofeedback based on the theta to beta ratio, it was recognized by the American Academy of Pediatrics to be as effective as the medication for the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Okay, now let's not spend much time in the bands, in the power bands, and let's see like how from moving to one single power band, how we can move to the cross-frequency coupling between two different bands. Okay, so the functional role of the cross-frequency functioning coupling is based on two principles. One is the fact that the high frequencies reflect local domains of cortical processing, and the other is that the low frequencies reflect cortical processing in distributed regions entrained both by external and by internal cognitive events. So we have the low frequencies and the high frequencies, one in the local domain and the other one in the distributed regions. And the cross-frequency coupling of both of them, what it does is that it transfers the information from the distributed networks to the local networks for most effective processing. There are different cross-frequency coupling methods, and which include, for example, the amplitude-to-amplitude coupling between two different oscillations, like a low frequency, where I was talking about the low frequency oscillator and the high frequency oscillator. That, for example, would be theta band and gamma band, etc. We also have phase-to-phase coupling, and finally, we also have phase-to-amplitude coupling, which is commonly written as PAC. I will give you some examples of phase-to-amplitude coupling because it is the one that is gaining a lot of visibility nowadays in the recent years. So the principle of the phase to amplitude coupling is that the amplitude of a high frequency oscillator, for example, the gamma band, is driven by the phase of a low frequency oscillator, for example, the theta band. Okay, there are various ways of measuring that. There are different kinds of implementations. One of the implementations which has been really commonly used is the implementation of Tort in 2010, who created the modulation index, which is a measure of phase to amplitude coupling. This modulation index is based on the estimation of the envelope of the high frequency signal and the estimation of the phase of the low frequency signal using the Hilbert transform. And then with this with the phase and the amplitude of these two oscillators, he creates what he calls the phase amplitude plot. And then he identifies the distance from the unit distribution of this plot, which resembles to be a distribution. And he calls this metric modulation index. And he says, the further the distance of this plot from the unit distribution, the higher my modulation, the higher my modulation index, and the higher the coupling between the phase and the amplitude of my underlying oscillators. However, Van Driel et al. In 2015, they introduced another metric, which they called the PAC, from debiasing PAC, because they noticed that when you try to estimate the Hilbert transform, like the phase, especially the phase from the Hilbert transform, as Hilbert himself says in his original paper, you need to have narrow band signals. However, most of the times, this is not the case in the EEG signals, because they need to be like neurophysiologically interpretable, which, for example, makes it like if you want to take into account the beta band, even if you break it into low beta and high beta band, again, the low beta and the high beta, they are going to be quite broad. So he identified a criterion to debias from this bias that the Hilbert transform would introduce into the estimation of the phase. There are as well other implementations, so if you're really interested in this topic, you can encourage you to search for this. But I wanted to mention a last one, which is actually a very recent implementation. This was published in 2019 in Scientific Reports, and the authors present a new PAC metric, which they call time frequency-based PAC metric. This time frequency-based PAC metric, it avoids to use a Hilbert transform, and it does not rely on bandpass filtering, whereas it relies on a complex time frequency distribution to estimate both the phase and the envelope of the low and the high frequency oscillations with a high frequency resolution. The authors argue that this is more accurate for measuring the coupling strength. Myself, I have not tried that yet, but if you're really interested in the topic, I would encourage you to try that, to do so. Okay, so how are these applied into the EEG signals, and what kind of intuitions can we get from applying this phase amplitude coupling? So over the years, one of the most common coupling synchronizations between the low and the high frequencies was the theta to gamma PAC, which has been shown to be related to ordering and binding of perceptual features during encoding. Indeed, there was a study, a very recent study in 2018, that they did an experiment with associative memory, in an associative memory task experiment where they were associating object and color combinations, and they found an increase in phase amplitude coupling between frontal theta and frontotemporal gamma oscillations, which were specific for these picture color associations. And then again, this study supports the idea that the theta gamma phase amplitude coupling is related to binding features during encoding. Another article, again a very recent one, this was published in 2020, they measured phase amplitude coupling with for a working memory task, which was trained by TDCS. So what they found is that the augmenting the working memory training with TDCS elicited sustained changes in the theta to gamma phase amplitude coupling, for which both the strength and the timing of this coupling predicted the individual's working memory. and then that the TDCS was optimized for this PAC in the prefrontal cortex and the temporoparietal regions. And that was related with working memory gains. So from one side, we have this theta beta that you can see here, that it's related to working memory, and it's related to binding different context of information, different perceptual information from different senses. And from the other side, we have another coupling function, which is being grown up in the latest years, which is the delta beta phase amplitude coupling. This has been shown to be related with top-down processing, both in cognitive control and in affect regulation. I have identified two different studies here. One has shown enhanced frontal delta beta coupling, and this coupling was associated with increased risk for anxiety problems in a population, that this population, if I remember well, had family issues. And the second study showed that the delta beta PAC in the left frontal part of the brain was related to impulsivity in the bipolar disorder patients. So taking these findings into account and combining them with the fact that we know that the autism spectrum disorder individuals, they deal with emotion dysregulation issues, we applied this algorithm in this population. These are preliminary results, I have to admit, but we found in these results a higher delta to beta phase amplitude coupling for the ASD adult population compared to the typical developing individuals. Again, in line, so we believe that probably this finding can indicate affect dysregulation issues in the ASD population. Okay, so to sum up what we have seen so far, we have gone from the brain dynamics, from the brain, from the power of the EEG signals, the single power within each band, to the cross-frequency coupling, and we have seen what each band is related to, and then the cross-frequency coupling between two different frequency bands, for example, the theta to gamma phase amplitude coupling, that it's related to binding information from different sensory inputs. And then we have also seen for the cross-frequency coupling that the delta to beta cross-frequency coupling is related to top-down processing of affect regulation. So the question would be, okay, if we move to brain complexity, then what will brain complexity be related to? How is this measured and what is related to? We already saw that we had a hypothesis of cross-frequency coupling, so why the cross-frequency coupling would work. However, in this case, for the complexity of the brain, the thing is that we don't have a common definition. There is not a common definition that can say what complexity is. But there are different norms, there are different theories, and there are different notions. Today, we are mainly going to focus to the algorithmic theory of complexity, but before going there, I wanted to present to you like a toy example of how complexity would work in a very simple problem. So imagine that you have a full system, and then imagine that this full system is like really connected, or the nodes are connecting with each other, etc. And then imagine that you have a reduction in the number of the components, or a reduction in the coupling function between the components, or even adding noise to the system. All of these three situations are going to create different complexity in your system. So one of the theories of the complexity is the famous algorithmic complexity theory, which is based on the Kolmogorov complexity. The Kolmogorov complexity suggests that the signal that you're measuring, for example, the EEG signal, is the result of a program. And then the shorter program that that produces this signal as an output, the length of this program would be the complexity of our own signal. So there is an idea behind the signal that you see. There is an idea that there is a program that is very short that has generated this signal, and that can be actually pretty simple, this program. So the length of the shortest of the simplest program that generates your output is the complexity of this output. Okay, the Kolmogorov complexity is uncomputable, but there is a proxy to it, which is called the Lempel-Zip complexity. And the Lempel-Zip complexity is considered an upper bound of Kolmogorov complexity. This Lempel-Zip complexity actually measures the repetitiveness of binary sequences, and it creates a dictionary out of new symbols while scanning the whole binary sequence under investigation. So imagine that you have a sequence full of zeros and ones, since it's a binary sequence, and then it starts from the first zero. The algorithm, it puts it in a dictionary, it scans through, it finds an one, it puts it into a dictionary, then it finds a 0, 0, it puts that into a dictionary, a 0, 1, and so on and so forth, until it has reached the whole sequence. And then the final complexity is going to be the length of your dictionary in bits. So now, imagine a very nice notion of this theory and of other actually complexity theories is that imagine that you have an output like the S that you can see here, which is full of numbers that do not make any sense. They seem completely random to you. However, there is an equation that has generated these numbers. So this equation is very, very simple. So this is the idea. The idea is that we go from apparent complexity to simplicity, and instead of occupying, let's say, ourselves with the complex output, we are trying to find the simple structures that they have created these complex outputs. I would like to quote here Einstein. One of the nice things he said, make everything as simple as possible, but not simpler. So let's see later on why is that? What is happening with too much simplicity? Apart from the Kolmogorov theory on complexity, there are a lot of different theories, and there are a lot of different complexity measures, which you can see here. There are also measures based on fractal dimension, which is based on another theory, which is the chaos theory, but I'm not going to talk in this talk about this due to time limitations. Otherwise, I would love to. So we have the Higuchi's fractal dimension, we have the normalized length density, the dimension of minimal covers, the non-stationarity index, the permutation entropy. All of these, they measure in their own way the complexity of the signal. Sometimes they are related to each other through a power law or linearly or with any other kinds of laws. So let's focus here. We're going to focus on the Lempel-Zip complexity. And let's see what we can do with this. How does this work in the brain? So what we have shown recently, again, I am going to go back to the Parkinson's disease population, since I already explained to you a little bit how the disorder works in this case. So what we did here is we started from the spectrograms of the EEG signals. To estimate the Lempel-Zip complexity, you can start from the spectrograms, you can even start from the single EEG epochs, or you can even start from extracting the envelopes. The important thing is that you need to binarize your sequence, wherever that may be. The best binarization criteria to our knowledge is the median binarization, because this way we get rid of the outliers, and it's not sensitive to power changes. So let's say that we threshold our spectrograms with respect to the median values, and then we assign the 0, 1 for the values that are higher than the median, and then we assign the value 0 for the values that are below the median. And then we come up with this, with a complexity, with a matrix that only has ones and zeros. We enter this into our algorithm, and then we get the final complexity measure. In this case, we found decreasing complexity with disease progression, as you can see here. So the healthy controls have higher complexity than the RBD, which has higher complexity than the PD, and the higher complexity than the DLB. So this is why I want to remind you of that nice quote that you can go simple. Simple is good, but not overdo it. Okay, in this plot, I tried to summarize the findings of some studies. Please keep in mind that this plot is qualitative, is not quantitative. Not all conditions have been compared with all conditions that are next to them. But I found it very helpful for me to understand what is going on in different situations with respect to the complexity. And then I wanted to share this with you as well. So in this medium plane, you can see the healthy controls, so the healthy spectrum. And there from the right, you can see two disorders, depression and schizophrenia, whereas on the other extreme, we have MCS, that stands for minimally conscious state, EMCS, emergence from minimally conscious state, Parkinson's disease, anesthesia, UWS, that stands for unresponsive wakefulness syndrome, and actually it refers to the vegetative state patient. So I'm not going to go through all of them. I don't want to tire you, but I will just mention that, for example, for depression and schizophrenia, how has complexity served and what does it mean in this case, high complexity? So it was found in this paper of Lee et al. In 2008, quite an old paper actually. What was found, it was that the group, the patients of depression and schizophrenia, they had higher complexity both during resting state and during an arithmetic task compared to healthy controls of the same age. So what they the way they interpreted the result is that they thought that there was like an excessive increase of neuron participation to solve a task, like the similar task that could be probably solved with less neuron participation as happened in a healthy control state. Also, it's very interesting to mention here that there is also another paper, a more recent paper, which I'm not citing here, that showed decrease of complexity with antidepressant medication for the case of depression. Another paper, which I have indicated in the highest corner of the healthy spectrum, was published in 2017, and it was a study between, it was a study on LSD and the placebo group. So what the authors found, it was that the LSD group, they perceived richer content, they had higher complexity compared to the placebo group. And then I have to mention that this is an MEG study, but the findings were based again on the Lempel-Zip complexity. And then they also found, they suggested basically that increases in conscious level would result in increases in conscious content. This is how they interpreted it, an increase in complexity in this case. Now, if we go to the other extreme of the spectrum, where we find the NREM sleep, anesthesia, and vegetative state, UWS patients, this study was not done neither in resting state nor during a cognitive task. This study was a perturbation-driven protocol through TMS and EEG. And what they measured, it was, they probed, so the idea was to probe the brain and see how the brain is reacting to this probe with this complexity measure. So what they measured with this probing is the information content and the integration of the output of the corticothalamic system, which is based on the IIT theory, information integration theory, which is one of the theories on consciousness by Tononi. Okay, and then what we also did, actually within our project Luminous, and this research was initiated by, this article was published actually by Giulio Ruffini, who is the CEO of Neuroelectrics. What he identified and what he proposed is based on all of these previous findings, etc., a theory, an algorithmic information theory of consciousness. So he argues that we can call maybe reality as a mental construct derived from information, from compression of information. And then we show that the algorithmic information theory provides a very good natural framework to study and quantify processing. And he identifies two aspects of this. One is the structured experience, and the other is the information processing. So you can see that in this case, like complexity is used very, very differently from what we have seen so far in relation to the single band power and in relation to the cross-frequency coupling. It's a whole different story. I need to say that based on this theory, we also did a work that has not been published yet in collaboration with a group in Munich from Hubert Priestley. So in this work, what we found actually is increased complexity in the fetuses when we were giving them like more complex auditory sequences. And then the question that arose is like, is there really, if the complexity, increasing complexity due to the increase of the auditory sequence is due to a structured experience that comes from the outside, is there really a structured experience before birth, is the question that arose from this study. And some, like this is really the current state of the art, what's happening in the field related to complexity. And then another thing that I wanted to mention, which I found of great interest, is the same people who created the psychedelic study in 2017, they proposed, since they saw that, okay, complexity may be related to consciousness, and we found, let's say, higher complexity for the psychedelic group compared to a placebo control, they said, okay, how about trying to apply psychedelics as a treatment for disorders of consciousness? So this has not been yet carried out, but it's a proposition that was published in 2019. Okay, I hope you're following really. So we are moving from brain power, single dynamics, let's say, to cross-frequency coupling. What is happening across different powers? How do they synchronize? To brain complexity. What is this complexity telling us about things that happen in the brain? And then we're finally moving to brain connectivity. Now, keep in mind that brain complexity can be also measured from brain connectivity, but let's go step by step. Okay, so brain connectivity. We have different ways of connectivity, different definitions again for connectivity. We have the structural connectivity, which is based on the link of anatomical structures. We have the functional connectivity, which is the link of statistical resemblances across distinct regions. So in this case, we don't need to have anatomical structure. And then we have the effective connectivity, which is a link of causal relationships between these distinct regions. So in that, the third case, having an idea of the structural connectivity would help a lot interpret the results. From the three of them, the functional connectivity is the simplest, and basically the concept comes from that when two things happen together, they should probably be related. We don't have any a priori assumptions on the connected regions, as I said before, so we don't take into account the anatomical structures, which makes the functional connectivity more straightforward. Now, we can do the connectivity either in the channel space or in the source space. In this case, I am going to focus in the channel space. I hope we're gonna manage to give another webinar later on where we can go through the source space in more detail, but due to time limitations, it was impossible to cover all the things I really wanted to. So in connectivity in the channel space, you should be careful due to the volume conduction here. So for those who are not familiar with this, the volume conduction basically comes from the fact that there may be two sources deep in the brain which are sending signals to the cortex, which are these signals are, let's say, acquired by the same electrode. So finally, if you estimate the connectivity between two different electrodes, you don't know if it's because these two electrodes are really functionally connected or if it's because of the same source that is sending this information to both electrodes at the same time. So we're going to see later on best, let's say, practices on how to deal with this point. But before going there, some connectivity measures that you can extract. They can be directed. If we talk about functional connectivity, they can be non-directed, if we talk about functional connectivity, and they can be directed if we talk about effective connectivity. I remind you that the effective connectivity was about causality of different structures, of different brain units. So some metrics can include coherence, synchronization likelihood, phase lag index, mutual information, phase locking value, etc. I have noted for you a tutorial on brain connectivity measures. If you are interested in the topic, you can have a look at that. Another of the difference that is a consequence of the directiveness of the two different connectivity categories is that in the functional connectivity, we have a symmetric connectivity matrix, whereas for the effective connectivity, that would be asymmetric in your case. Okay, so we have a lot of measures, so what do we do with them? If you're using, since we are going to focus more on the channel space connectivity, this would apply for people who would use, for example, an OBO8, because anyways, with an OBO8, you would have 2 little channels to find the sources, to identify the sources. But then if you really want to see what is happening, like in terms of connectivity, the best way to do that would be in the channel space. So it looks like the best metric to use would be the phase lag index, which is insensitive to volume conduction, according to Cohen's book, was published in 2014, analyzing neural time series data. But if you really want to try different metrics, some other recommendations to avoid volume conduction, according to the same author, would include to focus on negative correlation like if possible, since the positive ones are maybe due to the volume conduction, and to principally test for temporary lagged connectivity, because usually the volume conduction is instantaneous. So if you check for different time lags, then probably this connectivity would be less affected by the volume conduction. And finally, whenever possible, try to test for different drug doses, or if you are using TCS, you can test for TCS versus a sham condition, because the volume conduction is expected to be similar across conditions. So these would be some recommendations on how to deal with the volume conduction problem and still carry out connectivity in the channel space. And then once you have estimated your connectivity, you can extract some features. I'm presenting here some possibilities. So you can have like the interhemispheric connectivity. You can have a connectivity which is called homotopic, which would be the connectivity between channels, like same channels that would correspond to one hemisphere and to the other hemisphere. For example, that would be C3 with C4, or that would be P7 with P8, etc. Then you would have the intra-hemispheric connectivity, which would be the connectivity within the same hemisphere. And then you would have the heterotopic connectivity, which would be the connectivity like with the other hemisphere, but not the homotopic one. So then the interhemispheric connectivity, as defined here, would include both the homotopic and the heterotopic connectivity. You can even, once you have done that, you can even extract some features from the from the graphs that you have created, but unfortunately I will not go onto this topic. One research that I wanted to present you in the connectivity, it was I chose this paper because for me it actually targets like a research direction that is quite new, and it's being really researched, investigated, explored, I would say, nowadays. So it is the commonly used hyperscanning. The hyperscanning refers to the correlation, let's say the connectivity or the interactions or the synchronizations between the brains of two different people or of a group of people who are doing the same task. So it is like the hyperscanning, like it's like a group measure, like a way of measuring group interaction. So this paper, what they show is that they presented a finger tracking task, both in the real world and in a virtual reality environment. And then they estimated the face locking value from one brain to the other. And actually they found that the two brains had very similar connectivity for the two situations, for the real gaming and for the virtual reality gaming, giving the idea that the virtual reality environment gives a very similar sensation of reality as the real world in this context. Okay, so I hope that you have managed to get a glimpse into the different kind of things that we can do with the EEG signals, ranging from band power to cross-frequency coupling, to connectivity and to complexity, and that you see that they are different ways of looking on the same tool, which is actually the brain. Now, before finalizing the talk, I would like to show you some potential technological applications. One of my favorite ones is on EEG and emotions. So a little bit to present you the idea. A lot of research on emotions and EEG is based on this graph that you can see here, which is called the circumplex. This circumplex has a horizontal and a vertical axis. The horizontal axis is called valence and ranges from unpleasant to pleasant, and the vertical axis is called arousal and ranges from inactive to active. So according to Russell in 1980, who created this model, all emotion categories can be depicted in this two-dimensional space. So we are using this space. We have developed our own feature based on the features that I have presented previously to you. And then from these features, we extract the level of valence and arousal for a variety of applications. So I want to show you here some. One of the applications that we carried out was to go into exhibition, to wear the NOVO with the SDK card, and to record the EEG signals, process them, extract features, correlate them with the valence and arousal, and then rate the paintings that these people were watching when they were moving in the museum exhibition. So like this, we could help the museum exhibitors to, even if they wanted, for example, even if they wanted, yes, to change, to redistribute the paintings so that, for example, if there were like more boring paintings concentrating in one room, so that they would place them all over the place so that the people would be kept like in a very good emotional level. That was one application. Another application that we are currently doing in collaboration with Corporate Visions, that is a communications company, is that we are we're trying to find the best tool possible so that we communicate what we communicate in a way that the person is going to learn that and to remember it, so that when they perceive it, they feel happy and they are attentive, motivated, etc. And we are doing this through a variety of videos, flyers, presentations, website, different video techniques, etc., to find out what is the best way to communicate the message to the people who need to receive it. And finally, we have been doing a lot of different exhibitions. For example, you can use the same features, map them to valence and arousal in real-time scenarios, and create music from your EEG signals out of these features, and then participate to expose them to different kinds of expositions. Well, thank you very much.